Yay, recording. Well, welcome all. It's December. Feels like it's been a really quiet couple of weeks. I imagine holidays and everything else. But despite that, it's somehow been full of bug fixes that I've been seeing going by. So first agenda item, announcements and highlights. As said, I've seen a bunch of sort of stream of bug fixes around package builds. Mostly seems to be fallout from CPAC. Big kudos to Teddy. He seems like he's doing a bunch of work on that, and presumably Stefano as well in the background.
Yeah, I'm trying to put in effort. I'm creating motion. I'm not sure if it's progress. Stefano's actually introducing the knowledge to the effort.
You guys are both doing awesome work. I'm not sure there's anything else people want to highlight since the last meeting, but those are the things I saw go by.
I did want to discuss with Nick, I'm not sure if he's on the line, for Windows, building the MSI, I was able to build it myself. I think there's still ambiguity if there's anything left to roll into CPAC before we can delete the old make Windows package script, because we aren't supporting that right now. And Zach highlighted an issue with it, which it hasn't, because we're not supporting it, we haven't kept it up to date to include the certificate bundle. So to remove the ambiguity, I'd like to delete that script, but I want to confirm that there isn't anything missing from CPAC logic.
I don't think I've seen Nick join yet, but I stuck an agenda item at the bottom. Any PRs people want to bring up?
There is one PR that was posted to, the answer is yes. Code review, where is that? Code dash review, got it.
Is it one of yours then?
No, it's Williams.
Oh, 5371?
5371.
Yeah, that's the NTFS journal events.
Yes. I looked at it a couple times and it looks okay from a code point of view. I haven't done any end-to-end testing of it, and I don't know Windows practices very well. So that's code style to the specific Windows APIs and assumptions around allocation. So I can't add any confidence there, but it looks well tested. And if I recall correctly, it's opt-in. So I wanted to ask how people felt about merging.
So Nick has said he's generally happy to review Windows stuff for the Windows side. So, I mean, maybe we should tag Nick on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, he's not mentioned right now, so.
I sent a message to Nick because he mentioned he doesn't really get GitHub events. And to some degree, I feel like if you're happy with it, Teddy, that's probably good enough. Like,
I'm only checking like style and Yeah, like I'm checking from like a very high level.
Yeah, but for us to move forward, like we can only, I don't want to block forever, right? So we can give Nick a little bit of time, and if it's flagged off, then we can always merge it and iterate and fix the bugs. I kind of don't know what other strategies we can use for kind of pretty hefty work like this.
If there's someone that like, so you, Seth, so you have some testing infrastructure.
Not much for Windows.
Not much for Windows. Okay. So that's the other thing is like, who can be like a beta tester for this and run it at some sort of, I don't think scale is a concern, but just like a machine that's doing stuff, right? For lack of a better description.
I mean,
where these like the events would actually be stressed.
do we? This work was done by Trail of Bits, so I hope they have a test for it.
It's well tested, yeah. It has a lot of unit tests, but like, is there a customer or specific person that has like run this, so we can have some like confidence that it's okay? Pretty significant. That's why.
I have a couple of systems where I can keep this running if you want.
Okay.
But I don't think we can use customers to as a test base.
Ted,
So-
your idea that it's flagged off is because it requires configuring directories to watch. So by default, it won't be watching anything. Is that what you're referencing?
Say that again.
You said earlier that your concerns are a little bit lower because it's disabled by default.
Yeah.
When you say that, are you referencing the fact that it has to be configured for specific directories or file paths in order to start collecting events? Or is there some other mechanism being used there?
There is another mechanism. So it should be behind a flag. Yeah, so I see that the publisher setup, configure, and run is all checking the G flag, enable NTFS event publisher.
Okay, so so the configuration is going to require both enabling the publisher and configuring it to have the appropriate paths.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right, so if I had to make a call right now, I would say let's merge it and iterate. But the guarantee that I want is like, it's not going to be attacks, right? So like there's someone turning it on and someone using it, and that we are going to iterate.
I think my one comment is we should probably not merge it before 4.1.2.
We can continue to block things until 4.1.2.
This one's just major enough. Like a new table wide, would be fine, but this feels a little bit more substantial.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'd have said yay. But
I'll also say that this looks awesome and long awaited for Windows. So props to William and Trail of Bits for making that happen.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I want to see awesome stuff land, and I don't want to continue to be blocked by bug fix releases. Those are competing priorities. Well, okay, so let's see what's required to get 4.1.2 out there. Is that another agenda item, Seth?
yeah, so I created an agenda item for 4.1.2. It's got we've kind of thrown a bunch of random bug fixes into it, and I'm not really sure how many of them we really need to block on.
Yeah.
I feel like the constraint ones are probably the big ones, which is like maybe the thing that we should talk about a little bit. For context for folks, a little while ago we changed the way some of the virtual table stuff passes the constraints around. So now things that are not flagged as necessary in the spec files will not get to the underlying table implementations. This has generally caused some amount of breakage, and then we fix things, so that's great. This particular, I think the decision that we needed a 412 was predicated a bit by Fritz here at Collide noticing that the MD-Find table stopped working. This was because the spec file was wrong, so it wasn't getting any of the constraints. Teddy fixed that one and then did a little bit of digging, and then I put up a PR to add a bunch more constraints. Not sure any of them are right, but it's a place to start. As well as starting to try and flesh in some more of the table test cases, just so that we hopefully catch more and more of these as time goes on. I think there's 2 pending PRs around the constraints. One from Teddy changes the way the additional behavior works, and one from me slapped a bunch of constraints into the spec files. Those are 6104 and 6105. And then I also see kind of a bunch of like packaging things in flight. And I don't know how many of those we want to actually tackle or just kick forward.
Yeah. Can we talk about 6104 real quick? Because 6104 needs to be discussed in some form of it landed before we can land your changes.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So if people want to spend just a moment reading 6104, probably be an easy starting point.
Yeah, the context here is when you define a virtual table, you can use this index option on one of the columns, and that turns that column into a primary key. If you add index to multiple columns, the combination of those columns becomes the primary key. So in the table generation code, we only ever define one primary key for each table. Currently, if you don't have an index, the primary key becomes this hidden column that SQLite introduces called row ID. And so what this change does is allows us to have a column marked additional without explicitly defining a primary key and not using SQLite's added primary key.
So to rephrase that, the status quo, so all tables must have a primary key. And the status quo is that the primary key is either the union of all indexes, if present,
Yep.
or a SQLite internal row ID.
Right.
And the original intent of 6104 was to allow you to have additional columns to get passed to the underlying implementation that for tables that did not have indexes.
Right.
I admit a deep confusion about what additional was originally for and why it necessitates having a primary key.
Yeah. So the additional option tells the index selector that query or that query predicate, the constraint, should be passed to the virtual table implementation. So it's called additional because the table implementation will do something additional or like different when that query or when that column exists in the query predicate.
And I guess so what is your change? I guess what I'm not sure of is why would additional ever require you to have a sort of end user defined primary key?
I don't remember why. So I'll admit that like it's been a while, but what I recall is if we rely on the row ID primary key and we do multiple scans of the table, and those scans produce different data, but have overlapping row IDs, inside of SQLite, it may optimize one of them out.
So to be honest, so I felt this bumps into, so back when I was staring at some other like table caching and joining thing, kind of what I concluded was that like fundamentally the way Osquery treats the OS APIs is like an impedance mismatch with the way SQLite expects the data to work. And that all we can really do is kind of make this best effort around like, if you run a select, you'll get back this data. But as soon as you start digging into like, oh, well, SQLite's optimized and is like now expects to be able to query for these columns and get the same data, like it all just explodes because we don't have a caching layer and anything that hits an API call may change between them.
Yep.
So coming from that perspective, I kind of feel like whatever feels mostly correct is probably good enough because there's probably a whole morass of incorrect details and like it's an endless forest of them.
Yeah, that's yeah. But so the intent of this PR is to make situations like that more explicit. So what we are saying is, in lieu of a primary key, we don't want to invent one. We just want to define the union of every column. So like a row, a unique row is essentially a primary key.
Right.
So I wanted to comment and add that what I remember and I've seen it, I've tried is that when you have the difference of having an index, custom index, and not having it, is that it depends on the implementation of the table. So if the table needs, so if the table does not return all the values each time, and then SQLite filters, if it doesn't do that and it depends actually on the value of a specific constraint, then that constraint has to be an index because SQLite will call it every time, will call the table every time if that column is on a constraint like a join or an in. So that's why you need an index which is on a column, or at least that additional, if you have it, that has to be an index. Otherwise, if you have the index on the row ID, you will never join or do an in on a row ID, and SQLite will only call the table once. So, for instance, if you have a Carver that works on single files, or another table that works on single files, there you need to have a column that is an index, and probably it will be the path, so that the table is called for each different file, because you won't go and carve the whole file system.
So, I mean, the place where we also see this is around performance things. Like we saw, what I remember is a huge performance regression on the users table, right? Because we dropped a column implementation. So like if you signal to SQLite that there's an index on something, it will basically assume it's cheaper to call that. So there's a lot of like, if the underlying implementation is making use of a constraint, then it has to be tagged in either index or additional. And which of the two seems a little fuzzy to me still.
So to distill that, is it correct, Ted, do you think, to say that what Seth just said is the case, that if a specific constraint needs to be specified in order to generate the correct data, then you need index or additional. And then the difference between index and additional would be that index can optimize the generation to only generate a limited set of data, while additional may not do such optimizations?
Yeah, and most of the that is mostly correct. I think in the way that we use index, we intend to have some optimization when that index is present. However, in auditing all of the tables, I noticed that we tend to put index in places where that doesn't happen. And we also tend to call things indexes that aren't primary keys. So we need to fix those.
That's probably because that was additional is underspecified. So
Right. I'm not.
Yeah.
There's no blaming here. It's
no,
just
no,
like
no.
the situation is correct. Yeah.
Not fault, but understanding causality helps
Yes.
understand fixes.
Yeah, and I think that once we've got these fixes in, I think documenting for people who are creating new tables what the appropriate meanings of these things are, and then making sure that whoever's reviewing new table implementations is checking such things. Because, for example, I don't believe that we're going to be able to do automated linting that an index is actually implemented. This kind of requires a human reviewer to verify such things.
Well, it is work, but I think we can, because you can look at the.
I would say, hold on. I would say not linting to enforce correctness, but linting to highlight places where we have to do a deeper dive code review. So if you see index or additional used, then when we add a lint that says this is the expectation, and so that we're all just clear about that, not actually enforcing that there is use of that column in the table. I think that's a little too complex.
Yeah, the enforcement, I suppose, is the issue. Do we have a way to expose such a message for linting and then be able to kind of approve it and move forward?
Not that I know of.
It's a nice to have, though.
Yeah. The only linting that I know of would be logic within the build, and that would be a little obscure. It'd be nice to have it surfaced inside GitHub UI. I'm not sure if that's possible. But okay, hey, so getting back, I have a couple minutes and then I don't have another room. Like I can't find another room here, so I'm gonna have to leave.
So tell me how 6104 changes the primary key.
If there isn't a primary key in the very rare situation where there's no primary key defined, but one column influences the behavior of the table, we define a primary key as the union of all of the columns.
So in the case where there are index columns and additional columns, the primary key is the
Index.
in the index columns. In the case where there are only additional columns, the primary key is all columns.
Correct.
And in the case when there are 0 index or additional columns, it's an internally generated?
Correct. Yeah. When a table always does a full scan of the data, then there's an automatically generated primary key. And that's okay.
I'm just taking some quick notes. No index, but additional.
Yeah.
Key is all columns.
Sorry, there's something I'm not getting. Why, if additional, sorry, let's put the example that you have no index and you have only additional. If additional does change the table behavior, shouldn't be the additional column be also an index? Because that's the point. And I think, yeah, instead of having all the columns though being an index.
So the one example where I've seen this happen is in the routes table. So the routes table uses an additional column, the type of the route. And so you can optimize how you fetch routes from the system by knowing if it's a gateway, a local, or a static route. So in this case, that is not a primary key. However, it influences the behavior of the table such that the table doesn't always do a full scan. In that case, we don't have a primary key. So we have to consider all of the columns together being the primary key. Essentially, there's no primary key on it. But in SQLite, we can't define a table without a primary key and without a row ID.
Yeah, makes sense.
I don't totally understand why, if SQLite is generating the internal primary key, why do we need to sum the columns? Is there a reason for that?
There is, because let's say you joined against that table, and so there are 3 types of routes you're looking for, and so the table would be called 3 times. One with the constraint of type equals local, type equals statics, type equals gateway. And each time, the first row generated, if we do nothing right now, has a row ID of 0. So then if you get into a situation where there's complex SQLite optimizations, it would look for a row ID of 0, see duplicates, and then remove the duplicates. So we want to prevent that situation. And so I think this does it. The steps here would be landing that change and then following up with the 3 that Ceph has, or 3 or 2 that Ceph has. Ceph, if you don't mind responding to some of the feedback, and I can come in here and help you with these. I can edit it. I think I have permissions to edit the repo.
If you do, you're welcome to. I'm happy to just go through and make some changes. This was a beginning, not a. I don't feel that strongly about any lines of code in there.
Okay.
I just, you sent something to Slack, and I was like, I can bang this out in an evening.
Nice. So I think that, and then the packaging related issues.
Yeah, and I'll assume, do you and Stefano, I'm trying to hurry a little because you said you had to go. Do you and Stefano have a good sense of where packaging is right now?
I think so.
I mean, I think, well, there's still that problem with naming with that packages. I think that one needs an upstream fix, unless. Maybe. Sorry.
Are you talking about 6074?
Yeah, sorry, the number. I think so. I don't have the list anymore. Just a second.
6074 is naming nitpicks.
Yeah, okay, that one. And yeah, the other one, the couple of corrections, again, for that RPM, I just approved it. I mean, I don't see major issues. Obviously, as Teddy was saying, we have to ask Nick about MSI, how they look. Beyond that.
Yeah, I don't. I understand the one that ZWAS opened, and then Stefano, or actually, okay, first, Stefano, the points that you raised in that pull request about TGV being applicable to macOS, and then also wanting to support SIP, I love that. I think we should just do that as a follow-up. If you have time, I'm happy to review that.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seem like a priority to get those working. So 412.
No. I mean, the zip part would be, it will be the one we need when we want to finally split the packaging. So because that's the kind of universal archive we can use.
True.
So yeah.
I mean, like, sort of, if you shipped tar balls, then it just means that you wouldn't be able to untar them without some additional tools. But it's not like you can build an MSI without additional tools, so. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we can still give the both options. I mean,
But I mean, I agree with Teddy. Like, I don't think we have to roll it together and just up and change it all when we change it all.
6109, the missing cert bundle seems easy to fix. We can fix the make Windows package script too, and just continue to use that. I kind of want to move fast on getting 412 out there. So whatever it takes to fix that, let's fix that. The other Windows one I don't understand. Where is it? I guess no one's kicking me out of this room, so I'm going to check in for them.
The joys of, I don't know which system y'all are using, but.
To be clear, is the make Windows package script still the one that's being used to generate the packages?
I'm assuming that's what Nick used to generate 411.
Yeah, it seems quite likely. Okay, cool. But I guess confirm from Nick would be helpful. And I agree, it's an easy fix. We just put the path to the cert bundle in the repo as the default path there, and then it will work.
Yeah. That seems like a one-line change in that script. So if someone has some time to do that, we'll just let's assume we'll delete the make package script like sometime next week, but if we can at least fix it now, that would be helpful.
Okay, I can do that.
I don't understand 6098. I think that I don't understand it because I don't understand some Windows commands, like when Nick comments LSC program files, SLS Osquery, cool. But then, so I guess my question is, when you install the MSI on Windows, do we intend to create the folder C:/OSquery? No, I don't think that happens.
Having recently looked at the make Windows package script, we certainly don't do that in that one. So if we're trying to replicate that behavior, or I guess, is this report saying that that is what's happening with the make Windows package script?
I don't know.
Maybe I'm as confused as you are.
This may not be a very well phrased bug report.
But do you see Nick's comment and the last code block that's printed there? That's concerning.
What's concerning?
When he does LSC:/ and then pipes it to SLS Osquery, there's a result. Does that mean that that folder exists in C:/?
I'm super confused. This is all very.
All right, so everyone's on my page now.
What is SLS do? I mean, that does look like it's. Yeah, I got nothing. I don't know.
I think SLS is basically grep in PowerShell. So it does seem like Nick is confirming that the Osquery directory is created. So I don't know. I mean, maybe we need to look into that script and see whether that seems to be something that we could fix in there.
Cool. As far as I know, those issues are the major blockers for 412. The issue with iBridge info would be a nice to have to fix if we can, but I wouldn't say that it blocks the release.
Agreed.
I just found an inconsistency in that I just commented a while back. I thought I had a way forward, but I don't know. I'll need to take another look.
Maybe we, yeah. Anything else?
I saw the Python tests merged. Are those in a good place?
Yeah, that's the base of the Python test restoring, meaning that there's no actual Python script that is running. It's just CMake changes, some bug changes, and some fixes to the base Python script. But I today and in the next couple of days I will start opening the PR for the single tests.
Nice. So I'm just taking some notes. Someone added caching submodules.
Yeah, I did. I was wondering if we could try this out. Adding the .git/modules under the cache, and then update the build script. So before we start building, we resync them and put them down again.
What cache?
The cache from Azure on the CI. So I was able to knock the build time down to like 4 minutes on my system with Ccache and this. 4 minutes in total with all the tests and everything running. So yeah, I was wondering if we can try this out.
Would this end up,
of course?
Would this end up caching the checkouts or the object files?
The object files. Yeah, under .git/modules.
Okay, so when a build happens, it lands in those directories.
I'm sorry?
That caches the intermediate build object files too, not just the checkouts.
It's the Git objects.
Okay, so no, it's just the checkout.
Yeah, kind of, but not yet what ends up inside the libraries folder. So it's just Git metadata.
Yeah. I mean, that seems fine. I don't have a problem with it. Why only for Linux?
Yeah, well, because on Windows and macOS, it is slow. I mean, we can cache this on other systems as well. I mean, I don't know how much it will affect the build time, considering all the jobs that are running. I was just wondering if we could gain a couple of minutes on this.
I mean,
yeah, I think it will probably halve the time of the configure step. So For instance, Windows, that is the major offender, takes 7 minutes, 8 minutes for the configure. Maybe it will go down to 4. I mean, why not? It's always time saved.
I'm fine with it. I'd rather find a way to cache the build objects, but this seems like a fine, fine thing too.
Yeah. I mean, you can cache the build object. The real issue is not having something that uses them correctly. So yeah.
Seems fine. The other thing that I threw down here was about the state of the MSI build in CPAC, which we needed Nick's input on. Nick has not appeared. I did ping him on Slack, so we'll see. Anyone want to chat about anything else?
Anyone working on anything interesting that they'd like to prepare the group for, so that we can get ready to jump in, think about?
I have an endpoint security subscriber, still working on it, but I'll have some time over the break.
Cool.
Nice.
Hi. Yeah, I'm kind of working a little bit on some Bluetooth stuff, starting with Windows first, but then looking to do OS X after that.
That's
Cool.
really
I could say one of the things we've been doing a little bit at Collide is we tend to spend some amount of time exploring p-lists. So for example, you can coerce all kinds of interesting Bluetooth information out of p-lists. Though one of the things I had to do was I wrote an internal p-list table because the Osquery p-list table is a little broken. So maybe sometime I'll fix that or get help fixing that. It's trying to, right, p-lists are a complex data structure, which needs to be flattened into a EAV style store. But the EAV keys we spit back are wrong. They kind of do the wrong thing for indexes or for arrays. So that means you can't really use it to parse complex data. I've never filed the bug report, so I don't know if anyone else knew that, but maybe someone who is better with C++ than me can chat through how that has to change sometime.
all right. Why not? I will share
We can talk some.
my BPF work. There's a small demo here, you can see. It's not yet ready, so soon.
That looks awesome.
Yeah, we tried to remove as many dependencies as we could. We are only using LLVM right now. Nothing else is being used. And yeah, hope it will prove useful. I was trying to get both a library and a tracer command line utility, similar to strace. We already have BPF support in the LLVM toolchain. However, Stefano removed some of the libraries to make it smaller. So we may have to make a small update on that.
I had a question for eBPF. So right now we have the Linux 4.7 headers in the toolchain. These are providing some enums, like the trace point and others. Can we bring those in closer to the table in the code implementations? I want to remove a dependency on the Linux headers.
The only thing I'm using from that is the bpf.h header, which could also be taken from the BCC project. I know they have a more generic implementation for that can be pretty much used everywhere. To be more specific, what I'm using there is just a couple of definitions for the BPF system call and the perf event structures. Everything else comes from parsing the tracepoint data under the /sys and LLVM itself.
That's what I thought. So because I was doing some experimentation with the Go BPF, and I was just defining all of those data structures myself, and then trying to run it on different Linux versions like 4.15, 4.8, 4.7, and 4.4. And I noticed that if you have an old Linux, then the specific probe or trace point that you're trying just fails. But it doesn't fail like catastrophic. Like it doesn't prevent your other programs from working. And you know at program load time whether it's going to fail or not.
Why is it failing? Is it due to differences in structures?
Yes, yeah. So like you wouldn't have the probe that you requested.
Oh, yeah, okay, I see.
So we can make our build a little bit simpler if we just added that that bpf.h file closer. So whether we define it as a third-party library that's header only, or we just bring it into that folder. That was my proposal. All right, that's not a proposal. It's what I was curious if we could do or not.
Yeah, it makes sense. There is something, I don't remember if it is a repository or a file, that is called virtual BPF in BCC and BPF trace. We can just take a look at that and import the same files.
Very cool. The reason I was interested in that is also to follow up on the Arch Linux build. And so I like that we're exploring the Arch Linux build. I would encourage other package maintainers to help us improve the build so that they could work for their operating systems. And in doing that, like pinning to Linux 4.7 and above adds a complexity. So we can remove that pin, then we'll be able to allow more operating systems to build Osquery, or to put it into their package management.
Yeah. Yeah, the only trouble with this was who is going to support the special build they are using.
They are.
Yeah. Yeah. The only, yeah, of course, they will still open issues upstream, and we will have to make sure that we can actually support the build.
Yes. Yeah.
But
I mean, I empathize with how difficult that is, but I think we have to ask that right now, that the package maintainer sign up to support that.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm all for it. I really like the idea of having distributions ship Osquery.
To some degree, we don't have to maintain and be responsible for those builds, right? Like, I would expect a course of action to be someone finds a bug, they might raise it in us. If we can't reproduce it in official builds, then we're going to end up kicking it to a package maintainer build.
Yeah, true. However, it may generate a couple of issues that would be, we already have many issues to look at, and having even more that we can't actually fix would be troublesome.
Yep. And we can't test to see if our fix addresses the problem easily.
I mean, we may need to be a little bit more ruthless around, can you test this in the official binary? You can download it here.
Makes sense.
And closes can't reproduce. Like, since you're still here, Teddy, and I was just writing up my notes, I had a question about 6104 again.
6104.
If there are both index columns and additional columns, what is the resultant primary key?
The combination of them all.
So it's the union of both the index and the additional?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Good question. Different topic. So defensive depth opened an issue 8 hours ago about blacklisting non-scheduled queries. So I imagine this is most important for on-demand queries, ad hoc queries.
Sorry, is there an issue number that you're looking at? Or?
Sorry, it's 6111, so 6111. It's the most recent issue. And so out of all the things to bring up, I brought this up because I think it's worthwhile for some discussion of how we want to proceed.
So somewhat related to this, I was trying to generate functionality where I could build an OS query without any of the native tables. So I wanted the tables to not be registered. And I wanted this so that I could come in and basically have an extension overwrite all of the existing tables to make some interesting test cases.
Sure.
And I learned a little bit about C++. For example, all of this code is running in the global init state, which I had never heard of. So thank you, Stefano, for helping me through that. But my conclusion was that I couldn't easily make a build time argument that prevented the tables from being registered.
Sure.
And instead, I haven't done any of the work. Like I could make a compile time argument, or I could maybe make like a deregister argument.
Yeah.
And where
we can do some more complex stuff around linking and make it work. But yeah.
Well, but that's basically build time to me.
You'd have to make a code change. Yeah.
So part of why this is relevant is I was looking at this and I was looking at how blacklisting works, and my conclusion was I have no idea. You know, like if you blacklist something, what do we think should happen? Do we think it should basically be unregistered, such that an extension could register under the same name? Should we register something that basically just explodes? Should we register something that returns nulls? There's like this interesting question of if you say, hey, blacklist some critical table, and then something joins against it, like what should happen?
I think if it's blacklisted, it won't show up in the table's name. It's, I think, effectively deregistered.
You guys are talking about disabling tables.
Tag, right?
Yeah, we're confusing a lot of things here.
Yeah, so Ted is talking about blacklisting scheduled queries, like when a query uses too many resources and is killed by the watchdog. So that's a separate mechanism from disabling tables.
Never mind. Thank you. A blacklist to me always just invokes table disabling.
Yeah, so I mean, looking at this issue, we have this mechanism that allows a query that's taking too many resources, a scheduled query that's taking too many resources, will be noted by the watchdog, and then that query will no longer be run. And I don't know too much about the specifics of that. Now, this issue, for anyone who hasn't looked at it yet, the issue is that one can run a distributed query from a server that Osquery may try to run again after it restarts, because there's no notion of blacklisting a query that's run as a distributed query.
Yep.
So, Ted, your question, I guess, is like what should the expected behavior be?
Yep. Yeah. I think, if a query does if a scheduled query takes too many resources, and it then like blacklisted for 24 hours, and then you get a log that says that it caused an issue, took up too many resources, and is not running anymore. So most of the time, those queries, when they start to run again after 24 hours, they induce the same behavior, and that log is important because you should probably follow up on it. I think we could replicate that expectation here, where if you schedule a distributed query, or if you run a distributed query, pardon my language, and it takes too many resources and it kills the daemon, we should then not try to rerun it and just report back an error.
I feel like it should probably use the same blacklist.
But the difference here is a scheduled query you expect to run scheduled. Yeah, we don't want to try to rerun this query.
Right. I'm saying I think it should use the same blacklist, right? If a scheduled query falls into the blacklist, there's no reason to then let that query happen as a distributed query or vice versa. So like the error reporting path is different, but I think the blacklist is underlying the same.
If I remember though, scheduled queries are blacklisted by the query name and not the SQL, whereas do distributed queries have names? Certainly the distributed query name doesn't match up to the scheduled query name. So there's an inconsistency there.
So I had to run, but thanks everyone. If you have thoughts on this, please, we can follow up on the issue. The important thing is to set the precedent. What do we want the behavior to be? End to end from the user's perspective, what do we want? What do we think is ideal? Right now, continually running it and continually crashing the agent is not ideal.
Agreed.
All right, see everyone.
Thank you, Teddy. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Going back to disabling tables, Seth, I have linked to you the API that has been just introduced. You already have the up-to-date version of SQLite. We could keep everything inside the initialization we have right now, and then disable the tables with that method.
That was kind of what I was thinking about. I mean, I didn't know that method. A sort of different question there, though, is if this would effectively deregister them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't. If you blacklisted the process table, if you disabled the process table, is your expectation that an extension could come and add a new process table, or is it that anything named the process table would be blacklisted?
I would expect the table to just disappear so you can define your own, which would be useful with expressions. Yeah, I guess it wasn't exactly easy to unlock modules before. This API is pretty new. It's been introduced in a couple of months ago. I'm not sure if there was another way to actually remove them until this change.
Well, from skimming the code, all of this bounces through our registry, so we could just sort of leave the old thing present and just overwrite it, or remove the reference to it.
But yeah, I don't know. Blacklist would probably mean, for me, my personal interpretation, delete the table, while the table would probably just keep it there, but somehow make it not work anymore.
Anyhow, there's no PR up and no blueprint, so
yeah,
I'll take a note of this for my eventual poking around.
So I have a question.
This necessity now, what you just mentioned, Seth. Sorry, Zach.
I have a question for folks. Is anyone aware of a way to determine, besides for looking at status logs, which of the scheduled queries are executing successfully?
There's a table, right? Osquery schedule. I don't know if that reports it.
Yeah, so that report some information such as how many bytes were generated by the results, but some queries might generate no results while running successfully.
Got it.
I think that is hard to determine. When you start nesting queries, one inside the other, or using joins, you may have a table that returns an error, but the whole query will still work fine.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how.
But
I mean, I think you can catch the error somehow on the top.
For example, I think a feature that someone may like to have is, can I determine through a scheduled query or a distributed query to the Osquery schedule table whether there's just like a typo that makes the SQL invalid in one of my scheduled queries? I think as of right now, we can't even determine such a thing. If someone has a way, I would be very interested to know.
You mean short of parsing the status logs?
Correct.
I mean, what would a way look like that wasn't parsing the status logs?
Perhaps the Osquery schedule could return some status information.
So like a column for, was last execution successful or failed?
Sure.
It seems simple enough to implement.
I mean, I'd accept that PR. Sort of complex, a richer question there is, what if you have a query that effectively is flapping? Like, how do you end up having to go back to the status logs for that?
Sure. Yeah, and there are certainly errors, and I'm not sure that the table generation API even exposes a good way to get at the errors that occur during the execution of a query. I think that that's potentially a harder problem, but even something as simple as the SQL is just invalid, I think we right now have no way to detect that besides for the status logs. Okay, cool. If no one has other ideas on how that can be done, then I think it just sounds like something that would be nice to build.
Would the query also fail when run from Osquery I?
Yeah, I think it would.
Yeah. Yeah, then it shouldn't be hard to just catch the error from the query API, right? You can
we were in a status object, right?
So let's see. So no, I don't think so. I think a generate function returns query data. But now, if in the case of invalid SQL, we would never even get to a generate function. So I think that it may not, like at least getting some basic functionality along these lines may not require like a major refactoring. It might just require caching the data in the appropriate place, or storing the data in the appropriate place in the DB, and then accessing that when in the generation of the Osquery schedule table.
Yeah, I was actually referring to the SQLite API to query the database, not the generate. So I was wondering how hard it would be to forward this error somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be the approach to look into doing.
I mean, I think it's already done basically for the shell when you, for instance, when you miss a required constraint, you will get that constraint is missing. So it means that the error bubbles up to the shell. So I think we can store it.
Unfortunately, I think it's not really doing what you think. I believe that the reason you see that in the shell and it looks like it's happening kind of like it's being bubbled up is because there's just a log deep down somewhere that gets hit and the status is not in fact bubbled up to the appropriate place.
I mean, I know that in the virtual table class implementation we do set that error on the there's a field that SQLite gives you for the virtual table where you can specify an error message when you return with an error, like a SQLite constraint, which is an error, and that permits the shell to the shell receive that field with the error. So, for instance, already now we are in virtualtable.cpp, we are setting the message for required constraint is missing, which means, and that code is called by SQLite. So I'm not sure if it's synchronous or not, but we have control about setting errors somewhere and having them read somewhere else. So I think,
I mean, that would be great. And another thing along these lines would be like if a distributed query could return an error, which currently they don't, like an error such as you are missing a required constraint.
I think I'm just guessing, but I think we are just soloing them somewhere. I think we have the means to get them, but yeah.
Nice.
Need to investigate. Yeah.
I thought errors on distributed queries come in through the same status logs.
Yes, right. Again, through the status logs, but the status logs are being received out of band from like the execution of a distributed query.
But so are the results. Like there's a huge async model here.
Well, the results are received when the agent checks in to the distributed write endpoint versus the logs, which are just included with all the logs, which happens at likely a different interval and possibly even to a different logger plugin.
I guess that's an interesting point. Like advocating that some logs go through the results endpoints.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily a log, but a status. Yeah, I mean, maybe logs, but there's no way to differentiate. I think like you just had totally invalid SQL from you made a query that doesn't return any results to you were missing a required constraint. There's no way to do that without like synchronizing the logs somehow, and the logs don't indicate which distributed query was being executed. So actually, there's really no way.
I think they do. I thought they did.
Yeah.
About the SQL syntax, I was wondering, can we like run the queries against the database before we attach the tables on startup? So I mean, the tables should be there, but should be empty. We run the queries, and if they work, the SQL should be correct.
So this would be like a way that you could check the queries in the schedule using Osquery D. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah.
That sounds really cool if we could do something like that.
Or we could just replicate the entire schema somewhere else.
I don't think you can really do that with the richness of extensions.
Yeah, we would not work with extensions, of course, yeah.
I mean, I feel like if I reduce this a bit to sort of wanting query status to come back to the results endpoint, I feel like there's something that we would have to kind of change in the execution engine somewhere, and I don't know that part of the code to basically record that and then ship it back upstream.
But
and I have no
JSON in the, I mean, yeah, for the status logs, it's an issue. But for the SQLite errors, we already have support for this. If this was added with the writable tables, so if you return, for example, SQLite constraint from the extension, SQLite will catch this error. For the status logs, I have no idea.
as we talk about it, I feel I'd have to stare at that bit of the code, and I know I can't pull that up right now, but I feel like having it return to the results endpoint does not sound too wrong. It's almost like a decorator, right? And you return decorators, returning, hey, this thing had an error. I don't know, seems fine.
Oh yeah, I had another question or feature proposal. It is easy. It is about the CMake. I was wondering if we could add a setting at configure time to either disable or enable the make install target. The use case here is that since we are forced to symlink extensions inside the Osquery source tree, there is no way to either install Osquery or install the extension, because we will always automatically trigger all the install targets of everything we have. So yeah, this would more easily allow people to write extensions with CMake and install them and package them without triggering Osquery stuff.
Is there another route, right? Like, can we just sort of carve the SDK out of the main?
I would very much like to do that. The reason I'm proposing this is because it's probably just a couple of lines of change to make, while with the SDK is a little more complex, because sadly everything is spread across the whole code base. So we do have some kind of headers for the SDK, but in fact extensions are using pretty much that and everything else. So in order to separate things, we would have to do a bunch of work. I would probably start from scratch, from the thrift, get something up and running, and then see if there's any way to kind of provide a compatibility layer for existing extensions so that they can be built with the new SDK without too many changes.
So to kind of guess at something, when you say things are spread all over, that kind of implies that existing extensions are not just communicating over thrift. A whole lot of them are like leveraging the internal utility functions that we have scattered everywhere.
Yeah, true.
So like, when I write code in Go, I can't use those, so I have my own.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you say it that way, then I think I agree with you, right? Like, we should basically just write a clean room thrift SDK, and you don't get all the little Osquery helper functions unless you're like mucking around in the Osquery internals.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it is causing so many issues. I'm sorry, Stefano. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was thinking that right now the problem of the SDK is that it is one way, basically, which means the extension uses the SDK interface. The SDK interface reroute sometimes to the core. But it's not true the other way, meaning that the core does not use the function given by the SDK, which you may say, yeah, that's normal. But if you want to actually have both the core and avoid duplication of code, if you want to have the core and the extension use the same utility function, because why writing them two times? You would actually, I mean, you can take out all those utility functions in a separate library, which is used by both again, which is not exactly what is happening right now, because it is mixed.
Yeah. The argument for having them separate is that it's easier to maintain them, right? Like, OS query functions are not necessarily guaranteed across releases, right? It's sort of like, we have an API, which is, well, maybe not the best API, is like a stable API. And then, if you're going to write some code that like grabs internal functions out. Yeah.
No, okay. Maybe I'm just saying that these SDK, I don't think it should only contain the part for with thread communication. I mean, only thread communication. I think we can also put there some utility functions. Obviously, yeah, just those. Obviously, nothing that is internal and Osquery of the core use only.
I kind of go back and forth a little bit. You know, it's if we opted to put out so fundamentally we have a very bare bones API, right? It's a very simple Thrift API. If we put out a very rich batteries included SDK, that means we're sort of signing up to maintain that, which, you know, could be good or bad versus, you know, here's an API, you can use whatever you can use in C++ against it. I don't know. I'm neither opposed nor in favor. Right? I guess there's a conversation to be had there. Alessandro, I think when you say everything the way you said it, I think I'm in favor, or at least okay with creating a like build target of just, you know, the extensions and not Osquery. It's just like another build target.
Yeah. And yeah, going back to the SDK, it is causing. I'm currently writing an extension, and we always have to juggle with dependencies. For example, if we want to use Boost set extension, we will have to use the same Boost version used by Osquery. Otherwise, it gets messy.
Well, or you could build a
even
clean room thrift.
Yeah, even for the simplest thing, we will have to import quite a lot of stuff. And the reason for the clean room implementation is, I mean, it would be nice to have some shared code between Osquery and the new SDK for as long as we do not have to depend on too much stuff from Osquery itself.
Yeah, I mean, we just have to filter down what is generic enough that can be used by both, and it's not, again, something that's specific. And then even if it's a utility function, then you are taking too many dependencies on the extension side, and so you end up again having the same issues.
Oh.
I mean, I would say start with the completely minimal thrift-based SDK, and then, you know, as we discover utility functions we wish we had there, we could talk about whether it's worth it.
I actually never used Thrift directly, so I don't even know where to begin with this. We should probably open a blueprint issue where you can comment more on it, Seth, since you, Zach, and Gruber experienced with the Go SDK.
A little bit, but I think of mostly Zach and Grub. Maybe I've just been patching it.
We could use the help.
Out of curiosity, what you mean directly? Can't we use the implementation we have now, like the what they are called? Well, the implementation we have that depends on inherit from T server, T whatever. I mean, we can just change them a bit to be the same for both Osquery and the extension. I mean, isn't that interface already fine?
I have no idea how it looks like, so I'm.
Okay.
I was just, you know. Yeah, if it works, we can start from that.
Okay. Well, we're a bit over time. Seems like most people have dropped off. Anyone want to bring up anything else? Okay.
Cool. Thanks for running the meeting, Seth.
Thank you all for your time and being here.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye.